I'm Kelly, and I met John right after finishing college. He swept me off my feet with his charm and ambition. Before I knew it, we were married and living in the apartment he had bought before our wedding. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, and I loved every inch of it. Our daughter, Sarah, came along soon after. She was perfect, John's striking blue eyes and my curly hair. I thought we had it all, a loving family, a cozy home, and promising careers ahead of us. I landed a job as a secretary at a small but growing company. The pay wasn't great, but I enjoyed the work and got along well with my coworkers. John, on the other hand, was climbing the ranks at his construction firm. He'd come home with stories of big projects and even bigger deals. I was proud of him, even though his long hours often left me alone with Sarah. But something in John started to change. He'd come home late, his eyes dark with suspicion. "Who called you today?" he would demand. "Why are you all dressed up?" At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was just being protective. But soon, his jealousy became suffocating. One night, after yet another interrogation about a simple work event, I confronted him. "You think I'm cheating? With who, John? The mailman?" I scoffed. He didn't smile. His expression was hard. "Don't play dumb, Kelly. I see how men look at you." I sighed in frustration. "John, my boss is happily married with 3 kids." It didn't matter what I said. My words fell on deaf ears. The arguments grew more frequent, each one chipping away at our marriage. I had always been faithful and always would be, but John's distrust was like a poison, seeping into every part of our lives. Through it all, Sarah remained blissfully unaware, or at least, that's what I told myself. She was only 10 years old, her world revolving around school, friends, and her iPad. I tried my best to shield her from our fights, but kids always know more than we give them credit for. The irony wasn't lost on me. John was the one always coming home late, always going on business trips. If anyone had a reason to be suspicious, it was me. But I trusted him. I believed in our vows, in our love. Why couldn't he do the same? One night, after a particularly nasty fight, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. John's soft snores filled the room, but I felt miles away from him. How had we gotten here? When had love turned to suspicion, trust to accusation? I thought about leaving, about taking Sarah, and starting over. But where would we go? What kind of life could I give her on a secretary's salary? Despite everything, I still loved John. I loved the man he used to be, the man I hoped he could be again. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. My mom, the rock I had always leaned on, had a stroke. It came out of nowhere, leaving us all reeling. She had always been the picture of health. After my dad passed away, she had thrown herself into gardening and book clubs, determined to live life to the fullest. She lived in a beautiful house in the fancy part of town, thanks to Dad's life insurance and smart investments. I used to joke that she was living the life of a retired movie star. But that Tuesday morning changed everything. I got the call at work. Mom couldn't speak. She couldn't move her left side. I rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding in my chest. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, doctor consultations, and terrifying medical jargon. I sought out every top-notch clinic in the area, desperate for someone to tell me Mom would be okay. But the prognosis wasn't good. The stroke had left her bedridden, needing round-the-clock care. I was overwhelmed. How could I take care of Mom, manage my job, look after Sarah, and deal with John's jealousy all at once? It felt like I was drowning, slowly, painfully, with no way out. Then, out of the blue, John came up with an idea. "We should move into your mom's house," he said one night over dinner. I nearly choked on my pasta.
"What?"
"Think about it, Kelly," he continued, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "It's a great house in a fantastic neighborhood. Sarah would have her own room, maybe even a playroom. Your mom needs care, and you'd be right there. Plus, we could rent out this apartment for extra cash." I had to admit, it made sense. Mom's house was far nicer than our cramped apartment, and I wouldn't have to commute to take care of her. But something about it felt off. "I don't know, John." I hesitated. It's Mom's house. We can't just barge in. Ask her, he insisted. I bet she'd love the company. It's better than a nursing home, right? He had a point. Mom had always made it crystal clear. She never wanted to end up in what she called a glorified prison for old people. Maybe this could work. The next day, I nervously brought up the idea with Mom. To my surprise, her face lit up. Oh, Kelly, she said, her voice weak but full of warmth. I'd love that. This old house needs some life in it again. And just like that, the decision was made. We were moving in. As I packed up our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something big. I just wasn't sure if it was something good or something bad. John, on the other hand, was over the moon. He kept rambling about the garden he'd plant, the man cave he'd set up in the basement. Even Sarah was excited about having a bigger room. But reality hit hard once we moved in. I quickly realized that taking care of a stroke patient was more than a full-time job. It was an exhausting, all-consuming responsibility, one I wasn't equipped to handle alone. After a week of sleepless nights and stress-filled days, I finally hired a nurse. Nurse Jenny was a godsend. She arrived every morning at 8 and stayed until 6, handling Mom's basic needs. But the evenings? The nights? Those were all on me. I'd come home from work exhausted, only to start my second shift as Mom's caregiver. The stroke had affected her speech, leaving her frustrated and silent. I changed her diapers, giving her as much dignity as I could. Then came the sponge bath, the massage to keep her muscles from atrophying, the medications, and finally dinner. It was grueling, physically and emotionally. Watching my once vibrant, independent mother reduced to this state shattered my heart a little more each day. But I did it. Because I loved her. Because she would have done the same for me. What I didn't expect was Sarah's reaction to her grandmother's condition. At 11 years old, I thought she'd be old enough to understand. To help, even. I was wrong. One evening, as I walked toward Mom's room with her dinner, Sarah darted past me, her hand clamped over her nose. Sarah, I called out. Where are you going? Don't you want to say hi to Grandma? She shook her head violently. No way. It smells gross in there. I froze. Sarah, that's not a nice thing to say. Grandma needs our help and support right now. I don't care, she snapped. She's disgusting. I'm not going near her. Before I could respond, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, stunned, hurt. Where had my sweet little girl gone? I turned to John, expecting him to step in, to help me talk to Sarah, to remind her about kindness and compassion. But all I got was indifference. Not my problem, he muttered whenever I asked for help with Mom. I didn't sign up for this. It stung. But deep down, I knew he was right. He hadn't signed up for this. None of us had. Still, the resentment festered. I watched John and Sarah laughing together as they played video games. I watched him take her out for ice cream while I was elbow-deep in adult diapers and medication schedules. I was drowning in responsibility while they were living their normal lives. The only thing that kept me going was the thought that I was doing the right thing. But was I? Seeing how close John and Sarah had become was bittersweet. They had always shared a strong bond, but now it felt like they were inseparable. I'd hear their laughter echoing from the living room, or I'd catch glimpses of them huddled together over Sarah's homework at the kitchen table. It should have warmed my heart. Instead, it only made me feel more alone. 2 years passed in a blur of bedpans, medications, and stolen moments of sleep. Mom's condition had stabilized, but she still required constant care. I was exhausted, but I had found a rhythm. Then, on one ordinary Tuesday, everything fell apart. I was in the middle of changing Mom's sheets when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor from the apartment complex. Kelly, dear, she said, her voice dripping with concern. I thought you should know. I've been seeing John around quite a bit. Always with company. Young women. Different ones. Always very pretty. The blood drained from my face. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. Thank you for letting me know. I hung up, my mind spinning. That night, I confronted John. Oh, those are just potential tenants, he said smoothly. I'm showing them the apartment. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But doubt had already taken root in my heart, spreading like an unstoppable weed. And a week later, I found the proof. It was on the collar of his crisp white shirt, a perfect crimson kiss. My hands trembled as I held it up to the light, my brain scrambling for excuses. Maybe it's a pen mark. Maybe it's food. But deep down, I knew better. I waited. I watched. And when John left for his next business trip, I made my move. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door to our old apartment. The sounds from the bedroom confirmed my worst fears before I even turned the knob. There he was, in our bed, with a woman I had never seen before. They scrambled to cover themselves, but the damage was already done. "Kelly," John had the nerve to say, his voice flat, not even ashamed. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, at the tangled sheets, at the lipstick stain that now had a face to match. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look," he said, his voice disturbingly cold. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but let's be honest, Kelly. I'm bored. You're always busy with your mother. This is exciting." His words cut deeper than any knife. Without a word, I turned and walked away. My mind was already racing toward what I needed to do next. The divorce proceedings were ugly. John fought me every step of the way. He tried to paint me as unstable, as someone who was too consumed with caring for my mother to be a good wife or mother. In the end, we stood before a judge, dividing up our life together like it was nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. And then came the hardest part, custody of Sarah. She was 12 years old now, old enough to have a say. And when she spoke, my world shattered. "I want to live with Dad," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want to be around Grandma anymore. It's gross and depressing. And Mom's always making me help." I felt my heart crack into pieces. The judge nodded sympathetically. He considered John's higher income, the stability he could offer, and Sarah's preference. In the end, John was awarded primary custody. I was devastated, but I tried to convince myself that this was for Sarah's sake. John could give her opportunities that I couldn't: private school, dance lessons, summer camps. We agreed on weekends and holidays for me. A schedule that looked so neat and tidy on paper, but felt like a gaping wound in my heart. The day Sarah packed her bags, she chatted excitedly about her new room at Dad's new house. And I stood there, feeling like I had lost everything. The first few months after the divorce were painful, but I clung to my weekends with Sarah like a lifeline. We'd go to the movies, grab ice cream in the park, or just hang out at home. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then, slowly, things began to change. "I have a sleepover this weekend," Sarah would text. "Dad's taking me to a concert." At first, I told myself it was normal.
She was a teenager now.
She had a life. But each canceled plan felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Soon, the cancellations became more frequent. Weeks would go by without a visit. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts were met with one-word responses, if I got a response at all. One Sunday, after yet another canceled visit, I decided to call Sarah directly. The phone rang once.
Twice.
Then voicemail. I tried again. This time, a robotic voice greeted me. "The number you are trying to reach has blocked your calls." My hands shook as I dialed John's number. He picked up on the third ring. "What do you want, Kelly?" His voice was cold, annoyed. "John, I can't reach Sarah," I said, panic rising in my chest. "She's blocked my number." "What's going on?" There was a long pause. Then, "Look, Kelly, Sarah doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect that." I felt my knees go weak. "She's my daughter," I whispered. "And she's made her choice." Tears burned my eyes as I realized the truth. I had lost her. Completely. The days after that disastrous cafe meeting passed in a haze. I alternated between rage, grief, and a numbing emptiness that I couldn't shake. The daughter I had raised, loved, and longed for had become a stranger, cold, entitled, and heartless. She wanted the house? The same house she once called disgusting? The same home she had abandoned me in without a second thought? And then she threatened to sue me. The thought made me sick. For 14 years, I had dreamed of a moment like this, a reunion, a second chance, a bridge to mend the distance between us. Instead, it had turned into a transaction. All she wanted from me was money. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I been too strict? Had I been too consumed by Mom's illness to give her the attention she needed? Had John poisoned her mind against me? I had spent years hoping Sarah would find her way back to me. But maybe she never would. A month later, I received the official letter. Sarah was suing me for my mother's estate. I sat in my lawyer's office, my hands clenched in my lap as he skimmed the paperwork. She's arguing that, as your mother's only grandchild, she has rightful claim to the house and savings, my lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, explained. She'll claim you manipulated your mother into leaving everything to you. I let out a bitter laugh. Manipulated? I was her caregiver for years, while Sarah was off living her life. Mr. Reynolds sighed. I know. And legally, you're in the right. Your mother left the house to you in her will, clear as day. Sarah has no legal claim. Then why does it feel like I'm still losing? I whispered. The court process dragged on for months. Sarah didn't win, she had no case, but she didn't lose either. The damage was done. She had officially made herself my enemy. When the ruling came down in my favor, I thought I would feel relief. Instead, I just felt hollow. I sold the house. Not because I needed the money. Not because I was afraid Sarah would try again. But because I couldn't stand to live in it anymore. Every room was filled with ghosts of my mother, of my past, of the daughter I had once known. I packed my things, signed the final papers, and left it all behind. For the first time in years, I had no one to care for but myself. No mother, no husband, no daughter, just me. So I started over. I moved to a small apartment in a quiet town, far away from the memories. I got a job at a local library, spent my weekends reading in the park, and for the first time in my life, I focused on me. And yet, on some nights, I still found myself checking my phone, half expecting, half hoping for a text that never came. Maybe one day, I told myself, maybe one day she'll come back. But deep down, I knew, some things, once broken, can never be put back together. As I stood in the garden, the soft scent of roses filling the air, I let the reality sink in. It was over. The hope.
The pain.
The waiting. For years, I had held on, desperate for Sarah to return, for an apology, for a second chance at the mother-daughter bond one had lost. But she had only ever come back when she wanted something. Never for me. And this time, I had finally said no. A sense of peace settled over me, deeper than anything I had ever known. For so long, my life had revolved around loss. First, my mother, then my husband, and then my daughter. But standing there in the garden, the golden afternoon light catching the petals of my mother's favorite roses, I realized something important. I was still here. I had survived it all. And I was still standing. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then, without another thought, I picked up my pruning shears and returned to my work. There was still beauty to cultivate. There was still life to live. And for the first time in years, I was ready. Truly, completely free. Please feel free to comment below if you like this. Remember to like and subscribe for more.